Hello and welcome to the So What podcast, in which political economic analyst JP Landman discusses the issues uppermost in the minds of South Africans. You can find a written version of this content on JP's website, jplandman.co.za. I am Ruda Landman and I am your host. These first few recordings were done at our dining room table, but we will soon be moving into a studio. Hello and welcome to the second recording, the second part of this recording, which goes with JP's newsletter of the 1st of August 2022, Electricity Green is the New Gold. It is so packed with information and almost double the usual length, so we've broken it up. Please listen to the first part as well. And now we're coming to what we've called frequently asked questions about this. What about Eskom debt? What's going to happen with that?
It looks fairly certain that about 200 billion of the 400 billion that Eskom owes will be transferred from the Eskom balance sheet to the Treasury, the National Treasury, in other words, the South Africa as a country's balance sheet. Now, that sounds very intimidating, but it's not really. Of that 400 billion rand debt that Eskom has, more than 300 billion has been guaranteed by the government anyway. So government or the taxpayer is liable to pay for it if Eskom can't pay. So whether it sits on the Eskom balance sheet or sits on the Treasury balance sheet, it's really very much the same thing.
How do outsiders like the rating agencies see this?
The rating agencies, as a general rule, add these guarantee debt, what is called contingent liabilities. They add it onto the nominal debt that the government has, and they then calculate what the debt is as a percentage of GDP and how that affects the ability of the country to repay. So the economist that has been rated once again as the best economist on the JSE, Elna Moorman, has calculated that if 200 billion of the 400 billion is transferred to Treasury, it will lift the South African debt profile from about 75% of GDP to 78% of GDP. And in her opinion, that is not a game changer. It's not an event that will trigger a re-rating of where we are. In fact, it'll probably, as it has already done, trigger a re-rating of Eskom's debt, making it easier for Eskom to borrow, not making much difference on the South African side. So that's likely the way that it will play out. Now, Ruda, what we mustn't forget is that since 2018 or 19, Treasury has been allocating many billions of rands every year to Eskom as a kind of a direct subsidy to enable Eskom to survive. I think it's a much better arrangement to just take the debt on. Eskom can get rid of that interest payments and you've got a much healthier situation. It is not, we don't have details yet of precisely what that transfer of debt will look like. We'll get that in October at the time of the so-called mini budget. But we know from reports that have been leaked that Treasury is pushing that after the transfer of debt has taken place, there must be certain follow-up steps that Eskom must also take to improve their own balance sheet and own liquidity position. And maybe that includes that they offer to sell Medupi or Kusile. You know, once Medupi or Kusile is up and running properly and has been sorted out, it'll be a fantastic investment. You won't pay what it cost. That you won't do. You will pay it at a much discounted price. But at the right price, a power station is a lovely investment for a pension fund. You've got income for the next 30 years, and it's consistent income. So it must be possible to do deals like that, and we will get those details in October.
Eskom is talking about building battery
energy storage systems BESS.
Battery energy storage systems BESS. It's a wonderful, wonderful name. And planning to take on debt, extra new debt for that.
Yes.
Should one be worried?
No, I wouldn't be worried because relatively speaking, the amounts are small. The debt is a loan from the World Bank, which Andre de Ruyter has negotiated. It's for 11 billion rand, which will go into the BESS project, energy battery storage system. Now, if you think about it, the 11 billion rand is less than 3% of Eskom's debt. So whether it's there or not, I think it's not really material. We know Eskom can't pay the interest and they can't pay the debt. That's why Treasury will come in. So in the end, the Treasury is standing behind this kind of deal. But what the 11 billion rand does, it's beginning the process of building a storage infrastructure, energy storage infrastructure in South Africa. We did exactly the same thing at the beginning of renewables. The first renewable contracts were signed at, just hold on to your chair, 4.50 a kilowatt hour, at the stage when Eskom was selling power for less than R1 a kilowatt hour. On top of that, it carried a government guarantee. So we've really sweetened the deal a hell of a lot for those first renewable producers to get the wheel rolling. And today, of course, we have the benefits. The price have dropped from 4.50 per kilowatt hour to 47 cents. You know, it's a fantastic drop in price. And you were able to start a whole new industry, which we couldn't do beforehand. So I think it's a good investment if it opens the door to battery storage. It opens the door to battery manufacturing in South Africa. We're a big vanadium producer. We're the biggest vanadium producer in the world. You use vanadium in manufacturing batteries. So the potential is huge that can all flow. But you need, as you pointed out earlier, you need a client, you need a customer. And that customer will be battery storage systems. And that's why I think it's a good thing that Eskom has taken the initiative here. Although it is still very expensive. Hopefully over time it will come down.
The second question, of course, that everyone asks is, yeah, well, it's all fine, but will it ever happen? Because this government doesn't seem to be able to implement any of its own plans, I'm quoting. So what is your answer to that?
Well, I think one must distinguish, there's government and here it's not government but Eskom. And as the president said in his television address, Eskom now has a very competent management team and he has huge confidence in them. And I think he's right to have confidence. So yes, it will be implemented. And in fact, Eskom was already, of that 11 billion rand loan from the World Bank, they've already made a 4.4 billion rand contract with two companies, a South Korean company and a Chinese company, to come and build BESS systems, battery storage systems, here in South Africa, with technology developed and tested and used in South Korea and China. So yes, it will happen. And how will it affect us? I must read to you the names of a few places where we're going to see that. We're going to see these BESS systems, in other words, battery storage systems, installed at Skaapvlei, Paleisheuwel, Graafwater, Pongola, Elandskop, and Hexrivier. These are all rural names. These are all platteland names where you currently have bigger or smaller solar or wind farms. You put batteries down there. When the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, the batteries can be loaded. And tonight, when the sun is not shining, you can draw from batteries and feed the grid. That's why Eskom is doing it. I think it's a very strong development. And to answer your question, it's already happening. Not it will happen. There are the towns with the names where the systems will be installed. So yes, it will happen.
And the criticism that the contracts are going to not only foreign companies, but companies from the East who are renowned for bringing in their own workers and using no one locally?
Well, they will certainly have to train local people. Otherwise, do you want to stay in Graafwater forever? I don't think so. No, I'm not too concerned about that. The fact is we don't have the technology. We probably don't have the expertise to build it. And that's part of the thing. You must have your people here trained so that future BESS storage systems can be built by them. And that's the way that I think it will play out.
So what has happened to the IRP from 2019? Has that been ditched or what's happening?
No, on the contrary, the IRP of 2019 is being implemented ahead of schedule. I quote some numbers in the written text, but essentially the IRP runs up to 2030. And by 2025, we were supposed to have procured 9,400 megawatts of new solar and wind power in terms of the IRP. We are already sitting at 7,800, and this is now 2022. So we will easily beat that 2025 target. If you then add to the fact that a lot of the activity has shifted to the private sector with the president's announcement around private sector participation, and on the storage side, a lot of the activity has shifted to Eskom, then I think we'll easily beat the IRP targets. As a nation, we will easily beat them because solar plants will be built outside of the IRP and batteries will be put up battery storage systems will be put up outside the IRP. So in a sense, the IRP thing is academic, but we certainly will beat the numbers, which is an IRP, no question about that.
What about, what shall I call it, murmurings about a second Eskom?
I think it's exactly that, murmurings. Yeah, a second Eskom doesn't fit into the long-term picture which we've been discussing here today. Absolutely not. And, you must always see things in context. I watched the speech that the president made, in which he made this comment about the second Eskom at the South African Communist Party summit or meeting. It was 1 hour and 7 minutes. It was really, if you watch the whole thing, it was really a throwaway comment. The throwaway comment was then picked up by the media and taken further and so on and so forth, but it was really a throwaway comment. I would be very surprised if that becomes part of ANC policy, and then even more surprised if it becomes part of government policy. There's a hell of a difference between talking at the SACP conference, having an official ANC policy, and then having government policy. Those are three very different positions. So no, I don't think we'll see it. What I think we'll see is a gas company, a government-owned gas company, to build the infrastructure that we need to use gas in the country. We don't really have a gas infrastructure, only in a very small and limited way. If we want to reach a point of having 3,000 or 6,000 megawatts of gas supply available to the economy, we will have to put a few pipes in the ground, to put it that way. We'll have to build infrastructure. And that could possibly be done by a government company, a state-owned enterprise. So in that sense, there could be, but that's a second Eskom. But let's be very clear, a gas company is not a second Eskom. It's like saying a zebra is the same as a kudu. No. That's not the case at all. I first want to see, in any case, who's going to finance it. I don't think there's money in the budget for it. And I very much doubt whether private financiers would be willing to step in, unless there are government guarantees and so on. So let's see how that space develops. I'm very much in favor of gas supply, and I don't see a second Eskom as part of the long-term plans.
You've talked a lot about procurement for generation, but what about transmission? Because the transmission lines need to be upgraded enormously.
Absolutely. Transmission will remain a government monopoly. That's the case in the Netherlands, it's the case in China, it's the case in several countries. And that will be the case here as well. The president made that clear. Eskom itself is working with an upgrade of the transmission lines of about 130 billion rand. They're talking about 8,000 kilometers of transmission lines. And they're talking about 100 new substations to be built. And the price tag of that is 130 billion and more. So yes, that'll have to be done, and the transmission company that'll be formed will have to take that on. A portion of the money that we are getting or hope to get from the COP26 conference, that $8.3 billion, it's about 140 billion rand. A portion of that 140 billion will go for transmission lines for Eskom, because that's really the heart of energy transition. If you can get your transmission lines and your substations right, the rest follows. So I think that's how Eskom will finance it.
Thank you. Do you want to just have a look at what you yourself have listed as so what's at the end of this two-part series?
Yeah, and we must apologize that it's so long, but the topic is just big and complex, and one has to see it in its whole. When we talk electricity, we normally stop with load shedding, but there is just so much more to it. And that really is the only point I want to highlight. The Chinese word for crisis consists of two characters. And the one character indicates danger, and the other character indicates opportunity. And I think that's exactly electricity in South Africa. It's the biggest single danger facing this country at the moment. It's the biggest single constraint holding us back. But by the same token, it's the biggest single opportunity. There's nothing else in this economy. Agriculture, tourism, you name it. There's no other industry where we have the possibility of the investment and the jobs and the growth that we can have with electricity, switching from coal to renewables. And in that sense, it really is a case of green is the new gold.
Thank you for listening to the So What podcast. If you enjoy this content, please don't forget to leave a review and a rating, and please consider subscribing so you don't miss any future episodes. Also, tell your friends. Remember, you can find a written version of all JP's content at jplandman.co.za.